Hey everyone, welcome to the Stride to Freedom podcast. My name is Russell Benaroya, and I'm the co-founder of Stride Services, a virtual back-office bookkeeping and accounting firm serving hundreds of clients around the United States. This podcast is designed to help small business owners focus on growth and innovation. In other words, focus on those things that inspired you to start your business in the first place. We call it your genius zone. We do our job on this podcast when business owners feel like they have the trust and confidence to build the right team of partners around them that will help them grow. Thanks for joining. Let's go. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Stride to Freedom podcast. I am your host, Russell Benaroya. The Stride to Freedom podcast is all about helping business owners get and stay in their zone of genius. What is your zone of genius? It's that thing that you do that is effortless to you, where you lose track of time, where you're massively energized, where you want to spend as much time doing that as possible. The Stride to Freedom podcast is brought to you by Stride Services. We are an outsourced back office bookkeeping and accounting firm that has the express purpose of helping business leaders with a thirst for learning achieve their highest and best use. And how do we do that? We do that by helping support business leaders using data or information to make better business decisions. And so there is no better guest to have on the show today to talk about using data to make better business decisions than my good friend, Marcel Petitpas. Hey, Marcel.
Russell, great to be here.
So great to have you. Marcel is the co-founder and CEO of Parakeeto. They are a consulting firm and a software firm that uses data to help agency owners use information to better manage the efficiency, utilization, ultimately growth and profitability of their agency. And we have a little bit of a bromance going here because we just talk the same language. The minute that we met Marcel, I knew, oh, this is a guy that I'm going to enjoy spending time with. And so it's a gift for me to bring your voice and your story and a bit about your business to all of our listeners.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. And Russell, the sentiment is shared. Of course, you and I did an interview on my show as well, which I'm excited to air. And any excuse I get to hang out and chat with you, I will take.
Awesome. Well, we're going to have a lot of fun today. And I want to dive into something really important to start, which is CrossFit. You are a CrossFit guy. You are a CrossFit trainer. What's your CrossFit origin story?
I'm ex-athlete. I actually had a lot of concussions. I was, I'm 5'8.5". I tell people I'm 5'9".
So do I.
At my peak, I was 190 pounds, which got me through high school. But, towards the end of high school, playing a lot of contact sports. So rugby, football, hockey were kind of the big three. And I got bumped in the noggin a lot. I also had high impact positions. I played running back in football. I was inside center in rugby, and I got a lot of concussions and had to kind of stop competing in those core sports. And I needed an outlet for that. I had been working out since I was 14 years old. Fitness was a big part of my life for a lot of important reasons. And somebody talked me into going to a CrossFit class once, and I threw up 4 minutes into the workout when I was paired with a guy that was like half my size. And I thought this is going to be easy, no problem. And there I was, keeled over the toilet 4 minutes into it. And I thought there's something here. I need to keep exploring this. And almost a decade later, I'm like, 1,000 years old in CrossFit years. They're like dog years. They take a lot. It's like a year of smoking. I think that it's a very hard city miles on the body, but I enjoy it. It keeps me healthy and fit. And I'm having a lot of fun with it.
Oh, that's great. And you're still at it.
Still at it. Although I've had to change the way I approach the sport quite dramatically. I had to reel my ego in a lot and accept that I'm becoming, a weathered body, and I have to go and approach the sport with that mentality and focus more on warm-ups and cool downs and not do quite as much volume, but I'm still doing it and I still love it.
Awesome. Well, I am a CrossFit fan and did it for a number of years. I am also 5'8.75" and definitely average up to 5'9", although I find myself shrinking a little bit more every year. I see the kindred spirit here. So let's jump in to talk about Parakeeto. Tell me about where this business idea originated. It was fun learning about you and your co-founder scratching a bit of your own itch in trying to solve this problem in the agency world. Give me the story.
Yeah, I mean, I had kind of become familiar with this problem when I started my first real business, which was an agency. It was called Real Tours Media. Let's not cringe at the name. And we were doing real estate virtual reality services. And so we would go into a house and create, the VR experience of touring that house. But this was before technology like Matterport had become mainstream. So there was still this very technical, laborious process of taking a DSLR camera with a wide angle lens, taking a billion shots, stitching those together into a 3D image. And I did that for about a year and really started rubbing up against the challenges of having poor margins and really having to work hard at getting efficient enough to outsource the work. And I ultimately walked away from that business because I came to the realization that at the time, the real estate market was very different than it is today. It was a buyer's market, not a seller's market. Houses were sitting for a long time in our market. Average house price was like 150, 160 grand. So real estate agents were just not willing to make the investment that was required for me to be able to outsource the work, have enough margin to scale. And I realized that early on. I walked away from the business because of it. I then got into software. Through that, I met some people, including Dan Martell, who connected me to Jared, who was the original co-founder of Parakeeto, still on the board, still an advisor to us. He was running a software development agency and called me up one day and said, "Hey, I'm sick and tired of building spreadsheets to answer these questions that I'm asking myself every day. There's got to be a better way to do this, but I just can't seem to find it. We should build something to solve this problem." And that was the beginning of Parakeeto, this idea that we knew that this was a problem. We knew that there had to be a better way to solve it. Our assumption at the start was that it had to be purely software. And over time, I think as we've deepened our understanding of what it truly means to have great operations and great data in an agency, we realized that it had to also get enhanced with the service in order to be done properly.
What were some of the questions that Jared wanted to answer?
Yeah, probably a lot of the questions that our listeners are going to have every day. Things like, are we making money on our clients and projects? If so, how much? Which ones are most and least profitable? Are there any services that are more profitable than others? Are there any teams that are more profitable than others? What stuff should we be selling more of, selling less of? Where exactly are our margins kind of slipping through the cracks, or what are the leaky buckets? Do we have the capacity to take on this work that's in the pipeline? If not, when? Do we need to hire people? If so, when? What kind of skills do they need to have? Do we need designers? We need developers? All these questions that we're asking ourselves day to day. Are we utilizing our team properly? What can we expect in the future? It's very, very hard to answer those questions without having to spend a lot of time in spreadsheets, pulling data in from different places, writing scripts. It's very laborious, and therefore it doesn't happen often. And we find that a lot of people, just like I was when I was running Real Tours, mostly just running off of gut and making decisions based on intuition, which at some point starts to break down, especially as we start to reach some scale in the business.
In the accounting world, so accounting for the inflows and outflows in a business, I like to say that accounting could actually be quite easy. It could be very easy. A lot of the problem that business owners face in understanding their accounting is that what goes on upstream, where the information originates, is captured, classified, and organized in such a difficult manner that it then makes it hard to do the accounting. So Am I hearing you correctly that you go upstream to the origin point and say, hey, how do we make sure that we're getting the right information at the right time in the right place?
Yeah. And I think that's the thing that as a firm and as a technology company, we're really taking on in a different way than a lot of the other ways in which you might currently be seeing solutions, right? We're not trying to sell you an all-in-one software platform. We're basically going in and saying, okay, if we want your time tracking data to help you answer these questions, let's put some thought into how we set up your time tracking tool, what we call things, what objects get used, how we set up a new project, what the conventions are around that. Because to your point, a lot of folks, it's not that answering these questions is fundamentally difficult. It's all fairly straightforward mathematics, but the data often is just not structured in such a way that it makes it easy. And a simple example, the simplest example I'll give, and 9 out of 10 people listening to this, if our sample size of who we've worked with on an audit maps to who's listening, if you hold up an estimate for client work, and it says, this many development hours, this many project management hours, this many design hours. And then you go into your time tracking tool for that project, and you can't immediately see how many design, how many development, how many PM hours, then you have this problem, right? There is this schema that you've decided, this is how we make assumptions about client work, but the tool that is supposed to be telling you if those assumptions were accurate or not is not set up in order to easily answer that question. Therefore, there's a lot more friction in front of answering the simple question of, did we make good assumptions about this project when we scoped it? That is now hard to answer because there's data cleanup or remapping or grouping that needs to get applied to that data before it can support the answer to that question. And so we're really just kind of coming back to, what are the questions that need to get answered? What is the schema that needs to be true for those questions to get answered? And are the tools that we're using in the business actually creating data that is in that format so it's easy instead of hard?
What's the software side of your business? I certainly understand the service side and how you help guide and train. What's the software do?
It's about data transformation. So one of the issues that we've seen in the industry and that we've experienced ourselves is that most of us believe that we kind of have to choose between two bad options when it comes to our tooling in order to get good data that's supporting our questions being answered. The first is we use what we like to call best of breed tools. So a time tracking tool that's just really good at tracking time, a project management tool that's really good at managing projects, a finance tool like QuickBooks that's really good at finance and invoicing, all that kind of stuff. The issue with that, of course, is you now end up with data across all these different places and you have to get it together in a spreadsheet or some other environment to answer these questions. And we both know there's a lot of challenges with that. It can be manual, it can be messy. Sometimes there's cleanup that needs to be done. The other side of that is, let's just put everything in one tool, right? These are the Maven links and function points, and the list goes on and on. Very impressive, large suites of software. Incredibly taxing to change all your processes and people into that solution. And often there is a compromise in terms of functionality, like the project management in one of those tools is probably not going to be as good as ClickUp or Asana or Monday.com or Insert. Other companies have raised hundreds of millions of dollars just to be the best at project management. But the theoretical upside is, well, all your data is in one place, so then these reporting problems go away. That also is almost never the case in our experience, because we have worked with clients that are on those platforms. They always still end up in spreadsheets because there's a limitation. The data schema or the way that that tool is set up is too opinionated in one direction or another, because they have to keep one thing outside of the tool. So what our approach that we've taken is, let's build a transformation layer that sits outside of all the operations tooling. So you can use whatever you want. You want to use a spreadsheet to track time? No problem. You want to use Harvest, you want to use Toggle, you want to use one of the other 8,000 time tracking tools that are all good. No problem. Use that. What we're going to do is come up with what is the schema that all your data needs to end up in, so that it can quickly and easily answer the most important questions that you're asking yourself in your business. We'll connect those tools to this transformation layer and then create sets of rules that can normalize all of your data, both horizontally. So that means over time. So for example, if inside of your Harvest account, you've made some changes to the way you set up projects a couple of times over the last 5 or 6 years, right? We can normalize across that. So a website from 5 years ago can be compared to a website today. And then also we can do this normalization vertically. So your naming convention is slightly different in Harvest than it is in Asana. No problem. We can make those things match up. And as your business changes and tools change, or the way you set them up changes, we can adapt that transformation layer so that all of your historical data and all the new data is all coming back to a format that we can build reports on. And then we can look into the future, into the past, and we have a nice clean set of data that is detached from the operations tooling itself. So it's actually much more resilient, much more flexible, much more scalable. And that's really where we've invested a lot of time and energy on the technology side, is building tooling that can transform and maintain large volumes of data coming from a lot of different places and create a set of data that can actually be reported on very, very effectively.
How do you make your service approachable to an agency owner? So let's say I'm an agency owner and I'm doing 2 million in revenue. And I'm crazy and I'm creative and I don't have a lot of time. How do you help me approach this in such a way that I can get comfortable and excited to take this next step?
Yeah. Well, our entire strategy is around trying to take the burden of this stuff off of our clients completely, if they're willing to go down that path with us. Because I think there's a lot of aspects of this that can be really scary and overwhelming. Of course, there's all of what we've just talked about, right? How do we get the data clean enough to even answer these questions? That's one simple question. But then there's all these other questions that are complex, like, well, let's look at a simple quote unquote metric like utilization, right? Everybody thinks they know what utilization is, but let's unpack that for a second. Okay, well, there's two things inside of utilization. There's capacity and there's a billable rate. There is a long debate about what is capacity, right? Does it include time off, vacation time? Is it billable hours or non-billable hours? Like, what is a person's capacity? Well, we need to understand that in order to model utilization for an agency. And that might change depending on how they employ people, how their employment contracts are written, how much time off they take, how they structure their roles. And then similarly, what is a billable hour? Is it time that's productive? Is working on the company website billable or not? Is it just time that gets billed to the client? Is it all the time that's spent on the client project, regardless of if it's billed or not? Right? Again, that's a nuanced conversation that has to happen in the context of what is that business selling? How are they selling it? How are contracts structured? How do they pay their people? So there's a lot of overwhelm, I think, when people start to go down this path and say, okay, let's start tracking utilization. And then they start digging into this conversation and they go, oh, this is actually kind of really complex. And I don't know what the right answer is here. So that's a big part of how we help, as well as saying, like, we will facilitate these discussions. We'll come up with what the correct answer is for your business based on our expertise of looking at hundreds of agencies in this way. And then we'll also take care of all of the data problems that you're going to run into to get to the reports where we know how we want to measure this thing. And then we actually get the measurement of that on a regular basis without you having to worry about timesheet compliance, without you having to worry about, Sally setting up the project and harvest the wrong way and not following the naming convention. Our team will take care of all of that stuff. You just get the reports, and then we can sit down with you and look at the reports and say, what does this mean? What do we do about this? How do we actually make a good decision based on this? And all of the complex underlying issues we take off the table for you. So that's how we make it approachable. We take the most unapproachable part of running an agency and we just say, let us do it for you so you don't have to worry about it.
I'm feeling this problem very deeply because I believe all professional service firms that are dealing with utilization, right, with their people and the projects they're working on or engagements feel this same issue. So whether you're an outsourced bookkeeping and accounting firm, or you're an outsourced IT services firm, or you're a consulting firm, or you're an agency, the problem set is very, very similar. Do you make available your work outside of the agency space, or do you just focus on the agency? And why have you chosen that as your primary customer segment?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think you're absolutely right. This maps to fundamentally a service business model. So if you sold gutters or websites, at the end of the day, the business model is the same. You're selling skilled labor. And all of the abstractions that we place on top of that business model, like, the different pricing models we might use, whether it's time materials or flat rate or value-based or productized, these are all just different ways of creating operational efficiency around what is, at the end of the day, selling skilled time in exchange for money, right, and ideally a margin. So a lot of what we talk about can be applied to other businesses. And we have had contractors and roofers and all kinds of different people approach us to work with us, but we tend to turn them away, or we just point them towards our free content and hope that it can be helpful, because I think there's 95% overlap, but there's still that 5% nuance. And one of the things that I strongly believe in is to be hyper specific, hyper focused, especially early in a business. And I would still consider us to be a small business. And that's why we've chosen the agency space. We know it the best. It's where we come from. We have a lot of empathy. We know that this space is extremely underserved, which is ironic to me, because we deal with technology and we understand technology and we tend to be tech savvy in this industry. However, there are better technology solutions and better services often available for accountants and lawyers than there are for agencies. So we found that this niche was underserved. And we believe that this is the path to potentially serving more people, but we had to start and be specific if we wanted to build a really great service that could scale and actually serve a lot of people. And that's why we chose to focus very narrowly at first. And I would say that we would have to be at a pretty significant scale before we took our eye off that ball. Because I do believe that there's a massive opportunity just serving agencies. I think I could be happy as an entrepreneur if we never exited that niche, because the problem is just so rampant and almost everyone I talk to has it. So I know that there's just a ton of opportunity here to do this better than anyone else.
I agree entirely, and love the discipline of customer focus. Note to all listeners: customer focus, customer focus, customer focus. And it's hard because you sometimes feel like, oh, but I'm giving up this big opportunity in this other industry, and I want to hedge. What happens if this industry I'm focused on like goes away? And so we have all these stories that create this unnecessary fear. Speaking of stories and fear, what is it that agency owners are feeling, or what story are they telling themselves when they come to you and are ready to commit to working with Parakeeto? What's going on for them at that time?
Yeah, there's usually kind of two distinct inflection points that we see people kind of reaching out to us at. The first is transitioning from founder-led everything to, like building a substantive business essentially. And we see that happening right around 10 employees, right? So this is when the founder cannot be the person that everybody directly reports to anymore. They have reached their capacity. And the founder also can no longer subsidize poor management of the agency with their evenings and weekends. Their capacity for that is now gone. So what I mean by that is, you can't just work a long night or work the weekends to get the thing done for the client that you didn't scope properly and that was going to take 100 extra hours that you didn't plan for. Like there's too much going on at 10 employees at that level of revenue for you to be the catch-all for all of that. So they're typically exasperated at that point, saying like, this doesn't make sense. Like everyone's working like crazy. I'm working like crazy. And yet there's just not that much money in the bank account. Something has to be wrong here. And they're coming to us often focused on the symptoms and not realizing the problem. So I look at this kind of like the chiropractor where I'm like, oh, my neck is sore. And then I find out that it's actually something that has to do with your posture or your feet, even like you need orthotics and your whole body's out of line or your spine is causing that thing in your neck. Similarly, they come to us and they think I'm paying my bookkeeping and accounting firm too much. And it's like, no, that's not the problem. The problem is you have a 30% gross margin on your service. There's just not enough there for you to run a business and still have a profit. But they tend to be hyper focused on spending at the overhead level and not focused enough on the fundamental margin of their service offering. So that's kind of the first inflection point. The second one that we see is right around that 25 employees mark, where the first real thorough level of management is being installed. And the founder's now having to completely be detached from client work and manage through people, which requires a level of visibility, both for them as a founder, but also for that level of management. So they have some feedback on how they're performing and they have some metrics that they can be paying attention to. Like everybody now needs some level of visibility into what's happening. And so we also tend to get a big influx around that point when it's like, okay, we need to build a system here that can run the business and that everybody can look to get the answers that they need, without having to physically go talk to somebody or have, be directly involved in a project to know what's happening.
When a agency is successful with Parakeeto, what is the outcome that they achieve? What are they now able to do that they weren't able to do before with confidence? What does that North Star look like for them?
Yeah, the simple explanation is see into the future. I think that's the objective for every agency. And this is an industry that tends to be notoriously reactive, right? It always feels like the agency is happening to us and not for us. And our objective is to get our clients to a place where they can see into the future with data. So this conversation about hiring, right? Who are we going to hire next quarter? Well, you can run some numbers and say, okay, well, if we close these 3 deals, we're going to need 1.6 designers in week 3 of Q2. It's right here. We close these 2 projects, their websites, they're roughly this budget. We're over capacity on designers. So we're going to need to hire one full-time and then probably find a freelancer. That's the kind of position that we want to put our clients in. Hey, if we close these 3 projects, then we should have roughly this much profit left over. Hey, if we give the client this price, this is how it's going to affect our profit margin objectively. Are we comfortable with that? Right? even having these nuanced discussions of like, I see this is one of the most fascinating ones, right? Is like, should we discount this project or not? That's a conversation that's happening almost daily inside of agencies. Well, there's some data that can help you answer that question. Well, number one, what does your utilization look like? What's it going to look like if you don't close this project? If it's still going to be high, then you probably don't need to discount that project. If your utilization is going to be low, then you probably do need to discount that project and just get the revenue in, right? It's not a straightforward answer, but the data can help you make a confident decision and sleep well at night, knowing that you did things in objectively the right way. So that's ultimately the outcome. And then from a numbers perspective, usually clients are doubling, if not tripling their profit margin when they work with us. Most of them, when we adjust for founder compensation, are doing 10-ish%, give or take. And after working with us for a while, it's uncommon that someone's doing less than 25% EBITDA, unless that's a decision. That's a decision that they could choose to make. We're going to reinvest a whole ton of this extra cash and profit into growth or whatever it is. We're going to buy a building or what have you. But the result tends to be much higher profit margins as well.
You price on a % of profit improvement? Because that would be an amazing model.
Not yet, but it's a conversation that we've had internally.
I learned about you originally. Well, our worlds collided in a couple of different ways, but originally I learned about you on the web. I was doing a bit of research around agency analytics and was so pleased and appreciative to see how much you give away to allow agency owners to do some of the work on their own. Maybe talk about your go-giver first mentality and approach, and how you help people get some initial tools before they even engage you.
Yeah, well, that's kind of always been my thesis, is our marketing should serve more people than our product ever can or ever will. Mm-hmm. And so we try to just be an open book. We try to share everything openly. We've got super detailed blog posts that we write about exactly how we think about calculating things like gross margin and net margin, and average billable rates and all that stuff. And then we give away a toolkit on our website, the Agency Profitability Toolkit, which has inside of it templates. It has spreadsheet templates, it has checklists, it has videos, instructional videos on how to use all the tools. And my objective with that was to give away everything that an agency needs to install the basic best practice level of measurement in their business without giving me or anybody else any money. Because I just fundamentally want everyone to be able to do this, because I really strongly believe that if we agree that small business is the backbone of the economy, then small agencies are the backbone of small business. Mm-hmm. So I really feel like I just want agency owners to win. It's a really tough business, but it's an important business. And if you get these few things right, you can have a much more sustainable business. You have a much better chance at turning that into, a real thing that employs people at scale, that has a big impact at scale. And ultimately, this stuff is still going to be hard. There's still going to be lots of opportunity for us to help people. And if nothing else, educating people on what best practice looks like is only going to increase the value of what we do, because people are going to realize okay, there's a lot involved in doing this well. And it is laborious and it is complicated and it does require a lot of really clean data. And it is something that's hard to maintain over time. So yeah, that's kind of what we have going on and how I think about it at a high level.
Are there things that an agency owner could do? Is there advice that you would give to an agency owner that says, hey, listen, before you call us, here's some low-hanging fruit, kind of top 3 things you could lean into and take a look at today?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is just make sure that whatever your estimate looks like, standardize that so it doesn't look different every time. And what I mean is not the formatting or the font, that's fine. It's the schema of that. So I'm talking about do you have a contract with deliverables in it? And within each deliverable, you might have some tasks, and within each task you might have roles like design, development, project management, et cetera. Or do you have a contract that has phases, and then within each phase you have deliverables? What is that structure? Nail that down so it's not a moving target, because that's the foundation of the data for your business. And then just make sure that you have a way of reconciling what actually happened. right? And don't go too detailed. Maybe it's just at the deliverable level, or maybe it's just at the role level, but like be able to go back and say, did this thing that we estimated actually happen that way? And if not, what was the difference? That's got to be like the first most basic low level thing, that if you can do that, and if you can do it easily and quickly, then you are now empowered to have a smoke signal for exactly where the profit is leaking out of your business. And you can then go and explore that with your team, start getting curious, start asking why. And what's most transformational about that, I think, is when you're having a retrospective conversation with your team, you're not spending any time arguing about what happened. You're spending all the time just discussing why we think it may have happened that way. But everyone can agree, here's the data. This is what happened, right? So that's got to be number one. Number two is your financial statements. Just make sure that you actually know what your agency gross income is, and that you actually know what your margin on that agency gross income is. And this is one of the things I admire about you, is you understand these things and you provide this to your clients. Almost none of the accountants that I talk to do, almost none of the financial statements that we audit give their clients this information, but it's critically important. Almost none of the agencies that I look at their financials, they actually are seeing their true revenue number, which is all the revenue that they're responsible for earning. And almost none of them are able to see how efficiently they earn that revenue. So just make sure we have a blog post on this. You can go read it, or just talk to Russell because he understands this stuff. But make sure that you can see that on your financial statements, because that is still, I think that's adequate. Like especially if you're small, getting a monthly read on like, okay, we get like a 60% gross margin on our services. That's enough to know like, okay, we're in the ballpark. We're doing, and then you can track that. Is it going up or is it going down? That's enough. So that's honestly top two. I could just stop right there. Is just like estimates versus actuals, have a feedback loop on that, and then make sure your financials are structured properly. And of course, underlying that is this idea of time tracking. So I guess that's number three, is have some way of tracking time. Doesn't have to be timesheets, but have some record of how much time was invested in the client. Because without that information, it's hard to make decisions about hiring, staffing, planning. It's hard to get information on if you're doing things and scoping things well or not, if you're pricing them well or not. So that's the top three, Russell.
We are big fans of standardization. So I appreciate you talking about that in the context of standardizing your estimation and the format that you use for estimating. From an accounting standpoint, there's so much variability that gets created when owners are doing a bunch of different kinds of deals. They sell their service a number of different ways. And that's not to say that experimentation in finding that product market fit around pricing and structure doesn't make sense. But at some point, we're really all driving to create this machinery so that we can de-risk the model of service, and we can spend more time focusing on the excellence of how we serve the client, not how we've structured their engagement. Reducing that variability is often overlooked in the frenzy of just trying to grow. And I get it, right? And that's the struggle for many business owners, but agencies really acutely.
Yeah. And I think there's a really important thing in there, right? That you mentioned, which is this idea that you've got to do some experimentation to figure out what works. And there are going to be some things that change, and just understand that this is not a binary decision that we're, talking about. It's not like overnight you have to decide this is exactly how we do everything. There's a 20% of structure that gets you 80% of the benefit, and still allows you to be iterative, still allows you to be adaptive within that. So it just start at the highest level. Start at the first 1 to 2 like levels deep in the objects. Let's just nail those down. Let's make sure we have a feedback loop on those. And then let's not worry about the nuance until we have more certainty about what that looks like. That's okay. We can iterate on this. We can go deeper later. But to your point, like having a little bit of structure there is what makes this stuff possible, these kinds of insights possible.
Interest of talking about business ownership and entrepreneurship, you're also building your own business. And so for the benefit of everybody listening, I'm curious if you could share a bit about one or two of the key learnings or challenges that you face at Parakeeto that you're trying to overcome.
Yeah, it's interesting because we wanted to believe that we could solve this problem exclusively with software. And we had that belief for many years, for 2.5, almost 3 years. We just were of the opinion that like this had to be a SaaS self-serve. And there was this kind of come to Jesus moment for us where we stepped back and just kind of realized how insane that was, and how that was actually the problem. When we really stepped back and kind of said, okay, let's clear the slate and let's start over. Let's imagine we're brand new. We're starting this business today. How will we approach solving this problem? And it made us realize we were contributing to the problem, which was like technology is not adequate. There needs to be strategy applied to this. There needs to be like proper thinking applied to this. And so that has pushed us into, ironically, becoming the type of business that we serve. We now sell services that just happen to be leveraged by technology. And we're rubbing up against all the same challenges that our clients are facing. And it's creating a ton of empathy. It's really interesting because there's like, we're going into it next week. We're going to go through our own process for reevaluating our own data schema and restructuring how our profit and loss statement looks, and our charts of accounts and our accounting system, and like all of those things we've got to dig through and eat our own dog food on. So there's been a ton of value in that. And so I think there's one lesson, which is like actually putting yourself in your client's shoes. If you have the opportunity to either run the business in a way that's similar to the way that your client does, or just actually getting inside of your client's business and shadowing them or spending a day in their shoes, like the amount of learning that comes out of that is really powerful, because no longer just go from understanding tactically what they're experiencing to also emotionally what they're going through at those different stages. And I think that just allows you to serve them in such a better way, because you can, that's half the battle, right? You're not just selling a service or an outcome. You have to like bring the entrepreneur along that journey with you. And a big part of that is helping them process the change that's happening. And it can be scary, and it can be intimidating, and it can be overwhelming at times. So that's been a huge learning for us these last few months. And I've really enjoyed that part of the process.
We find in the accounting world that when we sit down ready to talk about the detail, ready to talk about the numbers, that in fact, the less we do that, or let me put it a different way, when we don't start there, but we start at a higher level where we talk about like how they're feeling, or we talk about some of their current challenges or obstacles, or, hey, what are you scared of right now? Like start at the top human level. And then, yes, we have the information, we have the tools, like let's dig in to help you solve the problem. But I often find when you go right to the guts immediately and lose the context of why, like, where does this come from for you? You lose an opportunity to really guide the business owner. And it sounds like guiding the business owner is core to what Parakeeto does.
It has to be. Yeah, absolutely.
I know you do a number of these. You have your own podcast, so you ask people a lot of questions. Is there any question that you wish people asked you that they don't, but you'd love if they did?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think part of this is informed by our history as selling a software company and now transitioning to services. But sometimes we get on calls with clients and they just have this laundry list of like, I'm going to call them features that they want. I want to be able to see this, and I want to be able to see it this way. And then I want to be able to see this, and I want to be able to see this. And there's no conversation about like why, and there's no thought of like how much complexity that's adding to things for, and a lot of times like no value at all. Like, for example, like I want to be able to see net profit on my projects. Well, what does that actually mean? Let's unpack that for a second. Like, can we just pause and think about fundamentally that idea is just like flawed. Like there is no such thing as net profit on a project. Like your overhead isn't static. That doesn't make, what insight, what question are you answering with that? So like, that's one simple example that of course I'm getting triggered by this. You can see that
I can see
this is a thing.
I'm about to hop on this bandwagon.
It's a thing for me, but it's like this laundry list of questions or features or things that they'd like to be able to see, as opposed to starting the conversation with like, what is the simplest way that we can understand these three concepts about our business? Or what is the simplest way that we can support these three conversations that we have often? And so this is how, through our process, we have to kind of come back to that starting point. And we always start with like a strategic business model review. We go to the very highest level of like, is your business model actually sound? Are we clear on what problem you solve for your clients and why the services that you offer and the way that you service them is actually supporting solving that problem for them? And the way that you price things is actually like appropriate for the level of risk that you take on when you get into that engagement with the clients. Like we have to bring the conversation back to that point. Okay, well, now that we understand those things, what are the questions and conversations that the data needs to support? And then we take them through it. But the conversation seldom starts there. It starts with like, here's a bunch of like little things that we can't see. And it just takes a little bit of stress testing on like, okay, well, what question does net profit on a project help you answer for it to all kind of start crumbling? And then we have to start rebuilding the conversation from a more holistic viewpoint.
For those that aren't watching this on video and just listening, over Marcel's shoulder is Start With Why. Is that the book? Is that that just okay? Start With Why. So it's so apropos. Marcel, thank you so much. This was terrific. I have wanted to have you on for a while. This is a topic for all professional service owners, very specific to agency owners, to give them tools, capabilities, insights, and opportunities to take this thing that they created out of a passion pursuit to make an impact and make a difference and actually build something that is going to be sustainable through the cycles, sustainable in a way to maybe transcend them as the owner. You're helping transition them from running a business by gut and instinct to running a business by metrics and facts. And there's this zone where that instinct becomes a liability. And Parakeeto has built a really great bridge to help business owners get to that next level. So thank you so much for sharing.
Well, thank you, Russell. The endorsement means a lot coming from another person that I respect tremendously in this space, and that's also working very hard to solve this problem from the finance side. So this has been fun, and I'm really glad you had me on.
If people want to get a hold of you, learn about you, where do you want to direct them?
Definitely check us out at parakeeto.com, and you can listen to the podcast, the Agency Profit Podcast, anywhere that podcasts are available. If you want to check out that free toolkit that I mentioned earlier, just head to parakeeto.com/toolkit. And finally, if you want to just nerd out with me, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm wearing a shirt with birds on it, and I'm not hard to find. So make sure you connect with me there. I'd love to chat with you.
Oh, you totally stay on brand with that shirt every time. I love it. Marcel Petitpas from Parakeeto, thank you so much for joining us today on the Stride to Freedom podcast. Thank you, listeners. Have a great week. We will see you on the next episode. Talk soon. Bye.